So you've probably heard of a Senate filibuster, but did you know there used to be a House filibuster? In the early years of the institution, when it was much smaller, and people actually like went to Congress and debated things and stuff, and then like did laws, which is a very novel concept today. But that's what they did. Members of the House were getting tired of staying up too late because of very long debates, so they reinterpreted their previous question motion so that you could use it to cut speakers off. And this never happened in the Senate. And in fact, in 1806, they removed the previous question motion. So that's why the Senate has a filibuster and the House doesn't, I think. Like, every source disagrees with it except for House.gov. I don't know. This is unfact checked, like all of this. Also unscripted. Um, After that, it took a few decades for people to realize what was going to happen in the Senate. But eventually, they started using the filibuster, like the extended debate, to prevent votes on things, and this was increasingly annoying, especially as the Senate grew larger. I think it was used a bit pre Civil War, but more post Civil War. However, the Senate was still a fundamentally majoritarian institution because it was like hard, and parties didn't use the filibuster, so you needed to have a group of people, and to really hold out for a long period of time, you really needed to have enough people to be willing to stay on the Senate floor and yield to each other in some sort of cycle or something, as long as the Senate was willing to stay in session to wait them out. So it was not easy to use. However, it was used to stop some sort of World War One measure. I don't remember what, or some measure that would get us more involved in World War One. And Woodrow Wilson did not like that. So he used, um, so he pressured the Senate successfully um, as we are escalating towards war, and as such, he had a lot of power to do that. To add the cloture rule, which was that by a two-thirds vote, the Senate could eventually, and after like 20 more hours of debate and a 2 day notice period, I think, eventually end debate. Um, so this meant that now you could now you could actually get out of filibusters. However, this was only used like 5 more times between then and like the Civil Rights era, or I think including the Civil Rights era. Um, it was used for the Civil Rights Act of 1964, in fact, but a lot of other stuff was blocked. The longest filibuster ever was in 1957. Strom Thurmond, I think it was 1957, the Civil Rights Act of 1957, um, which had already been watered down significantly, I believe. But Strom Thurmond still filibustered it for 24 hours. However, nobody was willing to join him, and except for one person who yielded for a question, so it wasn't really 24 hours. Nobody was really to join him, and so that didn't really work, and it passed. But yeah, filibusters were hard, um, and they were only really used on civil rights, which was like very, very bad, and it propped up Jim Crow and did a lot of terrible things. Which Mitch McConnell will not want to tell you, but we'll get to that. Um, but it wasn't the like all-encompassing feature that we have today. In fact, as Ezra Klein will tell literally anybody who will listen, and I'd like to imagine he just walks down the street and tells people this in like I guess New York, is that where he is? Who knows? I guess if I ever go to New York again, I'll try to figure out where Ezra Klein lives and test that theory. Until then, um, he always says Medicare was passed with only 55 votes, and it's true, and that would be inconceivable today. Well, I think it's true. No fact checking challenge. Um, so, moving on, it was in the 70s that things really started to change from that. Because as there are more and more filibusters, and as we slowly escalate towards the sort of partisanship we have today, um, first, well, I think in 1975 it was, at the start of the new Congress, they actually briefly tried to get rid of the filibuster, or at least lower it. Um, they they did some wacky stuff, but eventually they came to an agreement, and they changed it so that it would now be as it pretty much is today. The writing of the rule at least is now 3/5 of all senators present. I mean, of all senators, but not just all senators present, like normal votes. So this means 60 votes unless there's a vacancy. Always 60 votes, even if people like aren't there, and there are notice, so they will be there. Um, and it also, except for I believe for rules amendments, which still require 2/3, because surprise, the Senate rules can actually secretly be amended by simple majority if you can get past a filibuster. I think. But the other thing that happened was that the Senate got tired of waiting through filibusters, so they made it so you didn't actually need to speak on the floor, which baked in the assumption that the filibuster would not be broken. So what that does is, unless you can like get unanimous consent or something, the rules now will basically assume that there is a filibuster, unless you agree to cut off debate, which means you always need 60 votes for everything, which is where we are right now, or where we were at least. Where we were at least until more recent stuff in the starting in the 2010s. The other thing that happened in the 70s was the Congressional Budget Act, 1974, which was notable because it introduced budget reconciliation, somewhat unintentionally. It was not originally intended for this, but you could like pass laws with it in a limited way, which would be much more limited later in the 80s by the Byrd Rule. So you could pass budgetary laws, and those budgetary laws would they're debatable, but the debate is a limited period of time. So you can get around the filibuster doing that, which means you can pass it by simple majority. Now, also, that there are special rules for proceedings with amendments, I believe. So that's why, before the Senate does that, you have to actually have an endless debate, which was what the filibuster was originally, but now to get around it, that's what you do. You have an endless debate on amendments for hours until, like, 5 a.m. Eastern time, or wherever the Senate is, and then you can pass something, and you have to like vote on like all kinds of hostile amendments, hundreds of them possibly. It's very fun, but that's a thing they do, and then they pass budget reconciliation stuff. But that's only on budgetary measures, and also the Senate's other responsibility, nominations, was not addressed by that, which was why that started to grow increasingly tense, where Mitch McConnell, who, as you know, hates changing the sizes of the courts, he decided that the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, which is historically a stepping stone to the Supreme Court, will be a lot smaller until Obama stopped nominating I don't know, liberals, I guess, to it, or really anybody to it, until Obama stopped existing. Obama didn't want to stop existing, and eventually there were 51 votes in the Senate for Obama to not stop existing. And so, armed with that, in 2013, after talks broke down a few months earlier, Harry Reid finally invoked what's called the nuclear option. It had been floating around for a while, which is where you use a point of order to force a non-debatable and thus non-filibusterable, because the Senate is still fundamentally majoritarian, vote and change the precedent on the rules. So in this case, even though the rules say that you need 60 votes to close debate on anything, now you need 51 votes to close debate on nominations for anybody but Supreme Court nominees. And because the Senate, it doesn't really, like, rules and precedents and laws and stuff, it's just really whatever's most recent that applies, I think. No fact checking. Because of that, it goes into effect over the rules which directly contradict it. And in 2017, Mitch McConnell, after the Democrats filibustered Neil Gorsuch's nomination, because they didn't really have a choice to not because of political pressure, after they filibustered Gorsuch's nomination, the Republicans used the same tactic, which they had warned against, but again, we're talking Mitch McConnell here, to make it apply to all nominees. And then in 2019, they used it to limit the previously very long post-cloture debate time, so they could ram through even more nominees that would previously be filibustered. And so there's also budget reconciliation. So the other more recent change, it's not really a change, but the parliamentarian who gets to rule whether things are eligible under the Byrd Rule and other stuff, which means they're increasingly important because the Senate procedure is incredibly screwed up. Like, this is just part of it. There's so much more. Like, I'm not even getting into amendment trees here. And maybe I will if I... Well, no, this is already almost 10 minutes long. We're not getting into amendment trees here. Maybe I'll do that another time. So, continuing with that, the parliamentarian decided that you can indeed use a provision that previously hadn't been used in the Congressional Budget Act to pass more budget reconciliation bills than one, per year, which basically confirms that it's the way to pass anything that's eligible under it. So now the filibuster only applies to like procedural votes, and or it only like will kill procedural votes and non-budgetary or non-bird rule legislation, which isn't quite the same thing, but I'm not even gonna try. Actually, let's try. So just as an example of that fun, the Republicans weren't able to use budget reconciliation to end the individual mandate of Obamacare, but they could set the penalty to $0 and basically end it. So that's just a taste of the amazing joys of the the repercussions of having the filibuster. Because surprise, bipartisanship isn't actually happening, which is getting to a debate now over whether the filibuster should be eliminated for everything, as it's been chipped away more and more and is starting to appear inevitable. But Democrats only barely control the Senate, and so they have moderates such as, I think it's at this point pretty much just Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema. Yeah, it's pretty much just them, like Dianne Feinstein folded on it. So, yeah, so they're like trying to secure bipartisanship instead, and their position is basically that the country is screwed anyway if there is no bipartisanship, and therefore it doesn't matter if they eliminate the filibuster for some reason. It's extremely strange. Joe Manchin seemed to briefly waver and suggest that you could go back to having to talk, which would be an improvement, I think. And it would probably be bad optics for them. But as democracy in the country is collapsing, especially if you happen to live in a state controlled by Republicans, it's like sort of important that Congress can pass laws again. And so yeah, they like should get rid of the filibuster, and hopefully they will. The commission bill that's happened recently, where they had a bipartisan deal, and then the Republicans had to quickly remember that they weren't trying to actually be bipartisan and go back to obstructing it. As a good example of why that isn't actually going to work. And so hopefully maybe they'll sway on that. But until then, we have tons of budgetary stuff like the American Jobs Plan, the American Families Plan, the American Rescue Plan. I wonder what the next one's going to be. I don't know. American Blank Plan. Submit your best comments to people who are half me, probably. In summary, filibuster is created sort of accidentally. They did not intend for it. They debated having a constitutional requirement for for 2/3 votes in the Senate, but they did not do that. It's used increasingly, and only it's used increasingly. It starts getting restricted in the early 20th century, although people had proposed it earlier. Oh, by the way, the summary is just where I add back anything I forgot to mention. So enjoy that. It's used pretty sparingly, but to prevent black people from voting, which is a trend that continues to this day. In the up to the late 20th century, and then it starts being used by political parties instead of just southern racists mostly. And now we have the 60 vote threshold, and ever since then it's been slowly dissolving as people realize that the Senate doesn't work the way they thought it did. Or, I don't know, I mean, Manchin wasn't even there when it worked the way he thinks it does, and he admitted that on the Political interview. Who knows? Nobody actually knows what he's thinking, but Chuck Schumer seems like a good person. Yeah.